Welcome to this explainer, where we're putting on our auditor hats to really investigate the true depth of executive environmental governance under ISO 14001:2026, Clause 9.3. If you've ever wondered how auditors actually distinguish between a company that truly cares about its environmental impact and one that's, well, just going through the motions, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to dig into exactly how lead auditors scrutinize attendance records, evaluate the depth of executive meetings, and identify those sneaky, superficial nonconformances that hide right beneath the surface. So we really gotta ask from the get-go, is your executive leadership genuinely driving environmental strategy, or are they just a passive signature on an attendance sheet? Because it's a critical distinction. In the corporate governance world of ISO 14001, top management can't just delegate environmental responsibility to a middle manager and look the other way. They have to actively engage. If it's just a tick box exercise to keep external auditors happy, the whole system is fundamentally broken. Let's lay down a foundational rule right now. Environmental performance cannot be sustained through policy commitments alone. It requires active executive leadership. As the standard dictates, management review is the vital bridge between what happens on the factory floor and what gets decided in the boardroom. Without that connection, your environmental goals are really just wishes on paper. All right, here's our investigation dossier for today. We'll be walking through the strategic governance mandate, defining review frequency, evaluating review depth, auditing leadership participation, spotting superficial nonconformances, and finally, driving continual improvement. Let's start right at the top with Section 1, the strategic governance mandate. Management review is not a chore. It is a critical evaluation of whether environmental commitments are actually supported by resources and action. ISO 14001 expects this to be a rigorously evidence-driven governance mechanism. This is the forum where leadership looks at the hard data and asks, hey, is our environmental management system actually working? Is it suitable for our current business environment? Is it adequate to meet our goals? If it's just an administrative meeting where people read off a status report and then quickly head out to lunch, it is completely failing its core purpose. Moving right along to Section 2, defining review frequency. These reviews should be woven seamlessly into your standard business year, rather than just being some reactive panic meeting scheduled right before an external auditor walks through the door. Interestingly, the standard doesn't explicitly mandate a single quarterly or annual meeting. Instead, it demands planned intervals that actually align with an organization's complexity and risk profile. By integrating these reviews into existing corporate governance cycles, like, say, a Q1 strategy and risk review or a Q3 resource allocation meeting, environmental strategy actually becomes a core business function rather than an afterthought. So what happens when you miss these? Failing to establish or adhere to these planned intervals is a massive red flag for an auditor. It strongly signals that environmental oversight just isn't a true priority. If an auditor sees that a scheduled management review was delayed for 6 months because of the classic executive excuse of competing business priorities, or if it was canceled entirely and never even rescheduled, well, that tells a very specific story. It tells the auditor that environmental management is viewed as a highly expendable, peripheral task, not a strategic necessity. Let's dive a bit deeper with Section 3, evaluating review depth. Lead auditors are constantly hunting for data-driven performance evaluations, not generic, rubber-stamped approvals. There's a massive contrast between genuine oversight and just ticking a box. Superficial meeting minutes that feature vague statements claiming the system is effective without any data backing it up, that is a major nonconformance. Auditors want to see the actual rigor in the room. They want to read that management looked at a 10% increase in hazardous waste, actively debated the root causes, and made a concrete financial decision to fund a filtration solution. And top management cannot simply acknowledge these mandatory inputs. They have to critically analyze them to uncover systemic weaknesses and emerging regulatory risks. ISO 14001:2026 explicitly demands that specific elements are brought to the table, things like internal audit results, KPI performance trends, and environmental risk assessments. If a lead auditor reviews the meeting minutes and sees that compliance obligations were merely listed as a bullet point with absolutely no discussion of the actual compliance status or required action items, that is a severe depth-related nonconformance. Which brings us perfectly to Section 4. Auditing leadership participation. This right here is the exact step-by-step methodology an auditor uses to trace if top management actually engaged with the material or if they just delegated all the heavy lifting to the environmental managers.
Step 1 tells us if the meeting actually happened. Step 2 tells us if the right people were in the room. I mean, did the CEO and CFO actually show up, or did they conveniently send a junior proxy with no real authority? But Step 3 is where the truth comes out. An auditor will cross-reference those attendance logs with the decision records to see if the executives actually exercised their authority to create tangible change. There is such a stark contrast between executives who are simply in the room and those who are actively making strategic investments to solve environmental challenges. Passive attendance, like just listening to a presentation and signing the minutes, might get an organization past a really weak, poorly executed internal audit. But a rigorous ISO 14001 lead auditor is looking for action. Did top management allocate financial resources? Did they authorize corrective actions? If leadership just sits there and nods along, the environmental management system is missing its strategic engine. All right, let's talk about catching those flaws in Section 5, spotting superficial nonconformances.
Let's see how an auditor actually builds a case against an organization's governance. If they spot rapid-fire red flags, like the consistent absence of top management, zero review of compliance gaps, or completely unaddressed recurring audit findings, they know for a fact the management review process is compromised. For example, if internal audits consistently flag issues with waste segregation on the factory floor, but executive review minutes never even mention allocating resources to fix it, that is a glaring failure. It proves the internal audit is functioning, but executive oversight is fundamentally broken.
Let's use a real-world scenario from the source material. If a severe incident happens and leadership ignores it in their review, it completely undermines the integrity of the entire environmental management system. Just imagine a manufacturing plant experiences a chemical spill during the year. If the auditor checks the subsequent management review minutes and finds absolutely no executive analysis of the root causes or preventative measures funded for that specific spill, they will issue a major nonconformance. The review entirely lacks the necessary depth to ensure continual improvement and risk mitigation.
And that leads us to our final stop, Section 6, driving continual improvement.
The outputs of these reviews must be actionable, documented decisions that adapt the organization to changing environmental conditions and technological advancements. Outputs aren't just meeting minutes filed away in a drawer somewhere, they are tangible shifts in the organization's operation. These documented outputs have to clearly define how resources are being allocated, how policies are shifting in response to new regulations, and how core business objectives are being revised to push the organization further toward true sustainability. Because without clear action records tracking the progress of these decisions, the management review is literally just a theoretical discussion with no real-world environmental benefit. An auditor is going to take a decision made in Q1, say approving the budget for a new digital emissions tracking system, and follow that trail all the way to Q3 or Q4 to see if it was actually implemented. The follow-up is just as important as the decision itself. Accountability is the lifeblood of ISO 14001. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to look at your own organization's records and ask yourself this final lingering question. Look at your meeting minutes, check the attendance logs, and trace those decisions backward. Are your executives actively driving continual improvement, or are they just treating it as a compliance formality to satisfy an auditor? Be honest, because the answer to that question tells you absolutely everything you need to know about the true maturity of your environmental management system.